So good afternoon, everybody. Actually, we have a very international audience with us here today. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from whenever you are joining us from today. And welcome to this webinar on how can green fintech help to tackle climate change. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum and its sister publication, Global Government Fintech. Now, in terms of today's topic, tackling climate change is a priority for governments around the world, but the public sector can't meet climate challenges alone. And COP26 in November last year saw progress in nations' plans to meet their net zero targets. But as well as that, there was a recognition that the private sector and financial institutions in particular also have a significant role to play in the transition away from fossil fuels and to a cleaner, more sustainable future. Now, in this context, as the climate emergency becomes more urgent and the world becomes more digital, green fintech solutions are gaining traction around the world. And we're seeing government initiatives aimed at accelerating innovation in this area. In today's webinar, we'll ask what governments and public authorities are doing to encourage green fintech, both within their own borders, but also internationally. And we'll explore trends in that intersection between government policy, technology, and green finance. We've got a fantastic expert panel with us here today who will discuss all of these issues and more. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce our speakers. But this is also an opportunity for you, our audience, to put your questions to our great panel. So whichever device you are using, you should see on the bottom of your screen a Q&A function. At any point in this webinar from now on, please use that Q&A function to send in your questions. And once we've heard from our panel, we'll get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of today's webinar. So without further ado, let me introduce our fantastic panel. So first we'll hear from Teresa Jurkiewicz-Hoffman, who is a Senior Policy and Innovation Advisor at the City of London Corporation. She works on fintech, law tech, and wider technology concepts such as cloud and data. And Teresa has led the Digital Sandbox, which is an initiative that we'll hear more about today, as well as projects such as Innovation Ambassadors and other tech-focused programs. Then we'll hear from Paola Duca, who is Deputy Head of the Retail Payment Instruments and Services Department at the Bank of Italy. She leads the promotion of the digital development of financial markets through the analysis of financial and technological innovation and the coordination of fintech initiatives and innovation hubs. And Paola participates at many national, European and international committees and fora. Then we'll hear from Christoph Baumann, who is Head of Task Force for Sustainable Finances at the State Secretariat for International Finance in Switzerland. In this role, Christoph represents Switzerland in many international fora, including the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group and the International Platform on Sustainable Finance. And then last but by no means least, we'll hear from Catherine Foster, who is Community Director at the Open Earth Foundation and a Social Alpha Foundation Fellow. Catherine has been spearheading impact innovation for over 30 years and has held advisory and leadership roles in the EU, World Bank and the UN. Her current positions include being a member of the EU Blockchain Observatory and the Bank for International Settlements Digital Green Bond Project, Genesis. So I'm sure you'll agree with me, we have a really stellar panel here today, so please do take this opportunity to ask them as many questions as you can using that Q&A function. So now, without further ado, I'm going to invite Teresa to give us her opening comments. Over to you, Teresa.
Great, thanks, Siobhan. So as Siobhan mentioned, I'm a Senior Policy and Innovation Advisor at the City of London Corporation. And before I start, I thought I would tell you a little bit about who the City of London Corporation is, considering this is a global audience and you may not be familiar. So the City of London Corporation is a local governing authority for the square mile in London. But one thing that's unique about that is that not only are we a local authority, but many of our residents in the area are actually businesses. So we have quite a unique mandate in supporting the competitiveness of those businesses, such as financial and professional services across the UK. And in my team, we do that through nurturing an innovative ecosystem and also supporting tech adoption. So next slide. So today I'm going to talk to you about the Digital Sandbox, which is a unique collaboration that we entered into with the Financial Conduct Authority. The purpose of this collaboration was to spur innovation that could address market challenges in financial services, and that would accelerate tech development and do so in a way that was collaborative. So the whole goal of creating the Digital Sandbox was that we would end with tech solutions that are of higher quality and are in market quicker. And for background, we ran a pilot of this project in 2021, and now we've been running a second version since then. So next slide. So as I mentioned, a bit about this project is that we wanted to be able to build a virtual ecosystem that can support product development from both ends. And we wanted to be able to address a number of challenges in innovation, the first being access to data, the second being how to demonstrate a market need and speeding up tech adoption, and the third was that innovation often occurs in silos. And while this is something that's important to financial services, I think this can go across many different sectors of government. So what we're looking to do here is bring together representatives from all sectors, whether that's private or public, and be able to support collaborative innovation. The next slide. So you might be thinking at this point, what is the Digital Sandbox? How does it work? The idea is that it's a virtual platform. So when participants log on, they have access to different features. And while this Digital Sandbox is the first of its kind in Europe, Sandbox as a whole is not entirely a new concept. So in this one, we have technical features that support tech development. So like a development space and an API marketplace where techs can actually see how their tools might integrate with other banks, banking apps, for example. But then we also have other tools that are more around promotion and collaboration. So we have a messaging platform, we have showcase spaces, other ways to be able to help them interact with a wide ecosystem. And what's important here is that while some of these features are unique just to the techs that come in, the ecosystem as a whole is actually open to anyone to register. And so anyone can use the messaging, anyone can see the showcase space and be able to interact with the project. The next slide. So big question here is how does this go back to green fintech? So this year, what we've decided to do is actually focus on how we could use the sandbox to support green fintech, and more specifically, fintechs that are solving challenges in ESG data and disclosures. We came to this theme after quite an in-depth consultation with industry and thinking about not only where is the tech market at, but what data might be available, what gaps are in the market, and what does the regulatory atmosphere look like. And overall, we selected 3 use cases that we heard were really difficult in the financial services sector. So A, how do you make ESG data and disclosures more transparent? B, how can you automate assurance or validate data more efficiently? And C, how can you help consumers actually understand ESG data? So we've opened applications up early last year, and we selected 12 teams who are working on these themes to work with them and help them develop their products. So next slide. So what's important for today that I wanted to share with you is some of the things we've learned. In case you're thinking of running a sandbox, in case you're thinking about how can I support green fintech in my operation. So first one is that, as a whole, the sandbox has really shown that you can use it to support product acceleration. Our first cohort reported up to 18 months of acceleration, but actually we're seeing the same results in the second phase, not only in terms of contacts, but visibility and guidance that the techs have had in terms of their success criteria. The second thing is around data, which is a big driver for early stage tech firms. But one thing that I want to highlight is that data for each tech is actually very niche requirement. And so this has actually posed a lot of different challenges, whether it's how do we access or compile real data? How can you license expensive data sets, or even building synthetic data assets? And so this is quite a novel field that there's a lot of room for growth. Even for ESG, for example, there isn't a synthetic data set that exists. So modeling that through green tech is really difficult. I won't go through all of these, but the next one I wanted to go through is, if you are thinking of running a sandbox or accelerator, one thing we learned is that it really needs to have guidance for the techs that are in it. Some are really good at taking initiative, but most will look to you to support them in networking, facilitating other collaboration, or just guiding their development. And because of this, it's really important to start early on the ecosystem that you're building. So we now have an ecosystem of over 1,500, and we have 50 mentors for this cohort alone. But as you can imagine, financial institutions are massive, and it takes months to find the right contacts. And so you really need to start early. And then finally, as I mentioned on use case, there's a lot of consideration that needs to go into this. And so what we actually did is I published a report on how we selected ESG data and disclosures, the workshop procedure that we went through, the other use cases that we rejected. And I've shared that in the resources slide, which we'll get to in a moment. So next slide. So in terms of what's next and what's going to happen with the sustainability cohort, first is that the tech solutions in there are now solving until the end of March. So you're able to go online to the Digital Sandbox and register an account. You're able to see the showcase space, interact with the team, and we'll be hosting 3 demo days of the final solutions on the 23rd, 24th, and 22nd of March. And then we will be publishing a report to look at how we evaluate the cohort, evaluate the sandbox as a whole, and that will likely be sometime in April. So next slide. This slide is just a few resources to share with you in case you want to learn more about the sandbox, register. And what I will say is that we do publish the demo days on YouTube, so you are able to watch and record. And then final slide is my contact details. So if you have any questions, send me an email, or you can also send an email to our Digital Sandbox account, which is checked pretty often. So thanks everyone for listening, and put any questions you've got in me in the Q&A tool.
Thank you so much, Teresa. And I'm sure we can send those contact details and the links to everybody who's in the audience as well. So don't worry to the audience members if you didn't manage to catch all that just now. But thank you so much. Really interesting way for us to start, because I think you've given a particular case study there. So focused on that particular case study. But I think some of those themes I think will resonate with the audience and will resonate with other panel members. The kind of how do we speed up innovation, because it's so important that we move with pace in these areas. The importance of kind of supporting collaboration. You talked a lot about how that was important as well. And then all those issues around data and transparency. I think those are going to be issues I think that lots of people are already grappling with, and I'm sure our other panel members will touch on those as well. And then finally, really nice to get that lessons learned. So, I mean, part of these webinars are all about how can we share our experiences and share good practice and lessons learned. So I'm sure lots of people will look forward to seeing the report as well from this particular sandbox exercise. Thanks so much, Teresa. A really lovely place to start. And now I'm going to ask Paula for her comments. Over to you, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This webinar. I'm very pleased to share with you our experience gained in last year G20 tech sprint, and that I wish to thank really the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Last year was a very critical year for national governments to coping with the challenges that climate changing is posing. In this context, please, next slide. Yes. In this very complex context, new digital technologies and solutions such as DLT technology or information technologies and so on, artificial intelligence especially ones, may contribute to meet sustainability goals in the financial services. This phenomenon is called green fintech and is growing rapidly to becoming a really driving force for the creation of the environmental friendly financial system. There are a number of ways in which fintech and green fintech can interact. For example, by using artificial intelligence to measure sustainability and social impact of investment. Moreover, fintech solution may help financial firms to cope with the really big numbers of information related to the ESG factor. From the demand side, the spreads of platform can also help investors to access green investment to facilitate also access to personalized financial services. Next slide, please. In this context, the G20 Tech Sprint is an international contest that was launched by Bank of Italy, and the BIS Innovation Hub within our Italian G20 presidencies, where there are the three words, or famous three words in its agendas: people, planet, and prosperity. In this context, the two main objectives was to try to foster innovation to fight against challenging posed by the climate change, especially methodological and data gaps. And the second one, to try to foster also public and private sector to identify possible cooperative solutions in order to achieve sustainable development goals. Next slide, please. Tech Sprint was launched last May with the proposal submissions phase. Together with the support of the G20 financial ministers and the central bank's governors, we defined the three problem statements at the basis of the contest, mainly based on three main topics. The first one concerned data collection, verification, and sharing. Analysis, the second one is the analysis and the assessment of transition and the physical climate related risks. And the last one was related to better connecting project and investors. Next slide, please. Some figures of our Tech Sprint. Tech Sprint received really huge consensus, and we received almost 2,050 draft proposals, of which 99 was the project where the project definitely presented, coming from 25 countries. Among them, Italy, UK, US, Switzerland, China, and Singapore were the most active in presenting projects. Another interesting figures is related the project presented by the startups, which count about the 50% of the project presented. The 21 most promising and innovative solutions were shortlisted and admitted in the final phase, of which these 21 projects, the majority come from Europe, four from UK, 3 from France, 1 from Belgium, 1 from Poland, and 7 from Italy. Next slide, please. A jury of 21 top-level experts at the international level identified the 3 winners of the competition who were announced in the last October during the closing events organized in Milan. The winner of the first problem statement is a project denominated Greenomi, coming from Belgium, which is a platform to screen and report green financing projects. The winner of the second problem statement, it's an Italian project one called Climate Risk Analytics Suite, which is a platform which applies artificial intelligence to build climate risk and analytics. The third winner or the third problem statement is a project coming from UK, which is called Add to My Mortgage, which offers a solution to help financing more sustainable and green energy solution in residential home renovation. The next slide, please. Each shortlisted team received €10,000 as competition prize, And each of the 3 winners received 50,000 euros as his final prize. The 3 winners were fast-tracked into the finals of the Global Fintech Accelerator at the Singapore Fintech Festival last November. In the same festival, we organized an e-booth where a virtual meeting with all the 21 TechSprint finalists has been held within that festival. At the end, we thought that interaction and competition among different companies is a very important element in figure out sustainable solution around. Also benefiting from a broader cross-country perspective. And we really think that international awards like the TechSprint one are a way of encouraging both competition and cooperation around. And next slide, please. Just to leave you with a wish addressed by my governor to the winners during the award ceremony. Really wishing that the winners should go well beyond prizes in trying to leave us their contribution in pursuit the reliable and sound solution for sustaining the development of solid and green finance market. I think that the overall, the TechSprint has been a great adventure and successful one, I think. Also, really also thanks to all the support, active support we received by the BIS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, but also in general public and private sector representatives, participants, our partners, technological partners who supported us on this adventure. We are also convinced, more and more convincing, that the multilateral cooperation is the most important place where to discuss these really big challenges we have to respond to. So for the time being, it's all. Thank you for your attention. I'm here just to participate and that you have also my mailing that you can share to would be interested to have some other contacts after.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. We'll definitely do that. I'm sure people will have follow-up questions on the TechSprint. And really interesting, I think lots of similarities to what Teresa mentioned in her opening remarks, but you've got a great example there of an international kind of initiative where, as you say, lots of different organizations, lots of different countries. As you say, fantastic to see the response to that. So over 2,000 kind of applications to that, with 99 full projects being submitted from so many different countries. So really good to see that. Lots of those issues about data coming up again, about the need for collaboration. But what I really liked as well, because our audience will have different levels, I think, of understanding of these issues. You're right at the beginning, fintech, green fintech can be so many different things. It's kind of a term for so many different things. From, as you said, they're measuring sustainability and impact right through to helping investors to access finance. So it's not one thing, it can be a lot of these different things. So thank you so much, Paola. Christoph, over to you.
Perfect, thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to thank Paola and Banca d'Italia for really their leadership last year in the G20 presidency and putting forward Green FinTech also on the map of the G20. I'm very, very happy to see it part of the Sustainable Finance Roadmap, which means really this is a policy issue that really will continue to gain attention over the next couple of years. It's not going away, and that's, I think, absolutely key. Second of all, I wanted to quickly pick up on something you mentioned in your introductory remarks, that the public sector cannot do it alone. I would say yes, but they don't make it easy by still having fossil fuel subsidies and by not being able to have an adequate carbon price globally. And I was keen to use the a quote from the former Secretary General from the OECD, Angel Gurria, we need a big fat price on carbon. And I think that's really needs to continue to be a focus in our policy work globally. But in the absence of that, transparency is key. And there I want to highlight kind of like two main developments that really pushed this need for transparency in the area of climate. One is obviously Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement 2015 that really obligates countries to align their financial flows with net zero, which includes also with a 1.5 degree and a 2 degree warming scenario, which obviously includes the private sector as well. And the other thing, more recently at the COP26, you see the announcement of GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance of Net Zero. You see all these net zero pledges by companies and by financial institutions. And obviously there's a huge data need to really build these transition plans to ensure that these interim targets are science-based and to really follow up on these targets to accomplish that. So all in all, what this means, these two developments, it means that we're currently in the biggest shift in capital in human history, I would claim. It's an immense transition happening towards companies that have credible transition paths towards net zero. And whenever you're in the midst of such a development, those that can help these companies transition on and that can help leapfrog companies on their transition will have a huge business opportunities and that's exactly what green fintechs are about. So green fintechs, I truly believe that have an instrumental role to play, on the one hand, to generate the sustainability data, to make sense of the sustainability data that's gathered through satellite and other means by using machine learning, AI, etc., to really prepare the data and enrich it so that it can be used by companies and financial institutions. On the other hand, they're building the analytical tools. They're building these portfolio alignment methods that are now being used by global companies and global financial institutions to track if they're aligned with reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement. And they also help the financial institutions comply with regulatory processes, be it part of taxonomy or be it in other disclosure areas. So I think on the B2B side, there's a huge opportunity, but also on the B2C side, to customer-facing green fintechs, there are more and more challenging established players, putting them under pressure, and thereby also pushing financial institutions to innovate and to contribute credibly. Now, what does that mean for Switzerland? I think we really thought that we need a channel towards these green fintechs. As I'm sure the UK and other jurisdictions as well, we have very constant interaction with the banking sector, insurance sector, asset management sector, but we lack the communication with the green fintechs. So if they see challenges on the way, they didn't have a means to quickly contact us. And we kind of changed that around 2 years ago by establishing a green fintech network, which is really an informal network with the leading green fintechs in Switzerland, with VCs, accelerators, universities, and some associations. And this is really a group where there's an informal dialogue that can say what's bothering them, what's hindering them on their way to success, be it from the government hurdles or be it hurdles in the private sector. And we kind of put this idea together in an action plan. We published that 1.5 years ago, and we're really working down these actions so far. Many of them focused on increasing the transparency in the market, but also open banking, open wealth is a big topic, which obviously profits green fintechs as well. Also having a closer channel to talk with, to engage with financial institutions is a key thing. So kind of this is really part of our main policy work so far. Currently, we're working on, together with the Green Digital Finance Alliance, which is doing leading work internationally, we're working on a report that really helps policymakers understand what are the various green fintech applications and what are the data sources needed to provide these products for these green fintechs. It really should help build up knowledge with the policy makers to really help their green fintechs as well. We have an interim report already out, and the main report will be finished by the end of Q1. So I'm very eager to see what the feedback on that one. I'll leave it at that, just by summarizing that for us, it's one of the key pillars of our sustainable finance strategy because it accelerates transparency in the market. So we really see this as instrumental, and are very happy that other jurisdictions see it more and more like this as well, and are very happy to share our experiences. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Christoph. Really interesting there to get a slightly different perspective. I like your challenge to the public sector at the beginning. So big fat price of carbon could make things a lot quicker, could add a bit of pace. So good to start with that. But also the way that you set that out there, that this is one of the biggest transitions that we've seen, you know, and actually that these green fintech companies have a really significant role to play in helping people to make that transition. And so what you say there about the role of public servants and civil servants, because they're our audience today, is how can they help that to happen? How can they help these green fintechs play that role? Really, really important. And as you say, some policymakers, you know, it will be useful for them if they do have a better understanding of how these green fintechs can play their part in that ecosystem. So really good to have that perspective. Thank you, Christoph. And then last, but as I said, by no means least, over to you, Catherine, for your comments.
Thank you very much. Catherine Foster. I am a recovered climate and human security diplomat, including conflict diamonds, human and child rights. And I turned to innovation and emerging technology for impact over the past 2 decades, from microfinance to climate kick. And then during the past 5 years, I leveraged a family posting to Washington, DC, to dive deep into emerging tech for impact. I'm currently working with the Social Alpha Foundation, Open Earth Foundation, and a new role with the Digital Economist, but was previously with the Green Digital Finance Alliance, the World Bank, and I sit on a number of boards and working groups and collaborations, because to me, that is the essential element, the integration and collaboration across sectors and across actors internationally. And I state that because I came into this not from the financial sector perspective, but from the climate and emerging tech for climate financing, which is a very different sphere in climate accounting. And so what I saw were 3 silos. We had blockchain for and emerging tech for climate and sustainable development. We had green finance, and then we had the fintech and DeFi spaces also. So part of my operational agenda is to try to link those together. The next slide, if you could go forward. And yeah, so these are my current roles. And then the next slide goes to the portfolio of resources. These are some of the projects and initiatives I've been involved in or currently am involved in, including the UN Task Force, the big fintech impacts on developing countries, and the BIS Project Genesis, which is the digital green bonds report, and there are 2 prototypes building out. So the next slide. As I said, I like to contextualize the discussion because we've had 30 years of international agreements, goals, and targets on climate and SDGs. And both the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals are about national goals and targets, and we have to sort of align those with specific targets across sectors and for specific institutions. And the targets are also coming up for clean, affordable energy and net zero emissions. And this led myself and my colleagues to say, well, actually, this means we need very robust climate accounting. And what does that entail? Well, this is where emerging tech really came into this. But moreover, if you think about the time frame there, what we've had in terms of technological developments, we've gone from rotary phones, radar, and punch card computing, siloed sectoral tech, to what is now, you know, this incredible and integrated emerging tech environment. However, on the next slide, you see that we've come up against some key silos and issues in terms of the transformation into those sustainable development goals and climate. We've had infrastructure gaps, data gaps, credibility issues, efficiency challenges, and misaligned incentives, including the way that we have been doing previously innovation. And what I see is the emergence at that 2015 mark with the Paris Agreement and the SDG goals. We had the talk of blockchain revolution and the 4th industrial revolution sort of really taking hold. On the next slide, if we look at the blockchain evolution in and of itself, we see we've gone from Bitcoin to other cryptocurrencies and to tokenization of other assets. And from my perspective, I was looking at this from diamonds and the conflict diamond certifications to identity, property, and even carbon credits. And through key data points, through to smart contracts, to be able to transact on these, to have assets and to flow the data through value chains and transactions. And the underlying technologies have evolved to support a wide range of applications with new layers and applications to address the silos and those transformation gaps. But the trust is built for all of us. We've all talked about the trust is built on verified data, and that comes from GIS, satellite, biometrics, sensors. Monitoring, reporting, verification is really important, and it's about the integrated solutions. I won't get into the new next generation because there's a whole other wealth of things to discuss there. But instead, if the next slide, you just see, you know, even in 2017, 2018, we had this sort of explosion of pilots and use cases, proven cases for identity, conservation, energy, climate finance flows, tracking carbon and offset credits. But the lack of scaling because we were facing the same issues of silos, legacy issues, data, misaligned incentives. And so on the next slide, if you see, when I started working in the Green Digital Finance Alliance and into the fintech space, this is where I saw those silos. For example, you had, you know, Ant Financial and some of the early models. We have this fintech landscape emerging with models that were not really financial innovations, but they were incentivizations that support consumers, actors for offsetting and conservation. But these are now becoming much more robust, as we see with Every Action Count coalitions, with experts in sustainability and nature and biodiversity conservation, sharing best practices and engagement models. So what I am seeing is this sort of integration on the next slide of those three silos that I was talking about before, from the technology for climate, the green finance, and the fintech space. And then I just want to, I know I'm about 30 seconds left. I just want to go to the next few slides where I talk about one of my favorite issues, and what I see is really happening is the use case for digital green bonds. And the next slide, you see back in 2019, we had a toolbox that talked about the efficiency gains if we were ever able to do an end-to-end digital green bond. And we've had solutions sort of build out across the value chain of what a digital green bond would be. But I think we are now ready and almost at the state of being able to do those integrated use cases. And what I'd like to see, if you see in the next slide, is actually not just the regular sectors of investment for energy, transport, and the usual suspects, but we can actually have those integrated community fintech instruments into green bonds as well by aggregating on the ground existing community solutions. We actually are at the cusp of doing this type of work, and Hive Online is a good example. And the final three examples I'll give are on the next slide, and that is the integrated solutions and platforms that are emerging with EverCity, with portfolio management, digital asset management, and incentivizations, as well as Blockchain Triangle, which is basically offering a digital finance platform for ESG and infrastructure assets. So we're seeing the merging of these spaces. And some of them are now doing live tests, such as EverCity. You can actually test the EU taxonomy screening tool that they have. So it's a very collaborative environment that we're working in. And I'm really pleased to be able to present some of these use cases and background, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you
so much, Kathy. I mean, there's so much to unpick there in I think, but I mean, the takeaway message, I think, is from all of your experience of these different things going on in different countries, different organizations around the world, there is still some of these big silos, I think, in operation that are working against the most efficient way of progressing this. So the work that's been done kind of on the SDGs in the past, then the work on climate finance, and now green fintech. Actually, if we could get those things to be talking to each other much more, then how much more efficiently we could go forward. You mentioned there quite a lot about blockchain, the evolution of blockchain technology. We've had a question about that, so I'm going to pick that up in the Q&A when we come on to that. Again, you mentioned, as the others did, the importance of verified data, very important for trust, We've had issues coming in around trust and public perceptions on some of this, and then really good to see at the end some of those emerging integrated solutions. So how good this can be if we can get all these things working together. Thank you so much to all of our panel speakers there for those fantastic opening presentations. We are getting lots of questions coming in already, which is really good to see. I just want to, before we go into the audience questions, just one thing from me. I mean, you've all kind of mentioned some of the barriers, I think, but also some of those great initiatives that have helped to speed up innovation in this area. So just very quickly to get the conversation going, for the audience who are primarily policymakers, they are kind of working in the public sector, civil servants on the line. What do you think is the kind of key things that policymakers should be doing to help green fintechs to play their part in tackling climate change and kind of helping governments to meet their objectives? And you can build on what you said, because I think Christoph in particular, you touched on this, but what more would you like to see from the public sector to help green fintechs establish themselves in this space? I'm going to come back to you first, Christoph, because you mentioned this the most, I think.
Sure, very happy to. So next to having an active channel of communication, I think is whenever you do your general sustainable finance policy work, have green fintechs in mind as well. So for instance, when we talk about mandatory TCFD disclosures across the economy, why not think of asking for a digitally harmonized format so it can be used by companies much more easier than if they have to scan through PDFs. That's what the European Commission is planning to do, to have a centralized platform to do so. So that's exactly the right mindset to spark innovation. And the second also, when, for instance, you're working on, I'm sure every large financial center is working on open finance and open wealth concepts. Have green fintechs in mind as well. They might have exactly the same use cases, or to a large extent, they do have the same use cases, but maybe to some extent not. So if you want to have a carbon footprint on your portfolio, you might need to share, a bank needs to share potentially with your credit card provider, with a consumer, with a shopping center, and with the green fintech that then does the carbon footprinting, and maybe with another green fintech that does the compensation on it. So it's a whole new set of ideas you need to bring in as well. So I think that's the main thing from a policy work. There's not a regulation or so we can do to help them, other than some blended finance approaches in venture capital that some jurisdictions are pursuing. Switzerland is a bit more cautious on that front.
Right. Thanks, Christoph. Paula, your thoughts on this? Where can policymakers help the most?
I think we have many different instruments to do that. The first one is communication, already mentioned. The second one is studies, especially in terms of challenges posed by technologies, but also potential good solution that we can find around, preserving potential risks. This is the major issues we are to tackle with. I also think that dialogue is one of the most important ones, especially vis-a-vis the private sectors. I think also that dialogue can be improved with the many innovation facilitators growing up around, from the very innovation facilitator as such, or some apps, some innovation apps, up to the sandbox, which is much more complex exercise, in which I think that together with the private sector, we can try to foster some positive, innovative, and sustainable solution. I think that it's quite complex, but we have many instruments to do that.
Thanks, Paula. Teresa, your thoughts? So obviously Christoph and Paula both stressed the importance of communication and I think early engagement on these issues in the policymaking process. Anything that you would like to add to that from your experience?
Yeah, I think also to think about it from like the policy and innovation perspective is think about why aren't the tech companies able to scale, for example, and there might be issues that go across the board, but there might also be specific issues to your space. So is it like a lack of growth finance, for example? Is it because like they need to integrate into financial institutions and the procurement processes are too complex, that's where dialogue could play a huge impact. And also just thinking about, I think like Christophe said, thinking about how do you almost make it digital first? So how do you make your policies green first in the same way? So, you know, think about a digital ID. What if you have to have a green score, a green ID on there as well? And then I think also from the policy perspective, it is thinking about, is regulation clear enough and what should we be doing in that space? There's always a balance between wanting space for tech to grow, but needing to also have enough of a framework that companies that are risk adverse can actually adopt it. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done in the policy space around that.
Great, thanks, Teresa. Catherine, we're getting lots of questions in, but very quickly from you on kind of the thing that you would like to see policymakers do most, and then we'll go over to the audience questions.
I would love to see policymakers and regulators cross aisles, basically. I think a scaling framework is needed. You have to have cross-stakeholder co-creation and capacity building. You need strategic development to really address the solution gaps, as well as maybe an acceptancy of certain newer risks, or at least an identification of newer risks and uncertainty and new business models, because we are in the middle of an aisle. We haven't crossed other aisles, and there's a whole new landscape forthcoming as well that we have to deal with.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so we've got a question come in from Christina Angelova. It's quite a long question. I'm going to summarize it for all of you, but it's essentially saying, you've mentioned all of you different technologies like AI and machine learning, but how do we create more understanding about these innovative technologies, and in particular in regard to their carbon footprint? And although this person is a big believer in using tech, they are concerned that the public is still quite skeptical about some of these new technologies. And they mentioned, for example, that there was a pushback on a UK launch of new NFTs that were criticised, people pushing back on blockchain, for example, all those things. So how do we tackle this? Where do we start building awareness in the public? I think the question is, to build trust in these kind of new technologies. Teresa, you're nodding there, this idea of kind of the public and building trust in technologies.
Sure, and I can see Catherine is also starting to answer. I think from my perspective, you need to go back to like, how can we help the public understand what these technologies are there for and what they're doing? There's a lot of hesitancy towards data sharing, especially now. There's a lot of hesitancy towards how reliable or how biased information might be. So I think we need to have more conversations with individuals, be open about the limitations of technology, but also the opportunities, and that will help them change their perspective. And in the sandbox, that's why one of the use cases we made was around how do you help consumers understand ESG data? You know, they hear sustainability, emissions, net zero, but it's hard to really understand what that means to you as an individual. And I think that's where some of this skepticism can come from.
Thanks, Teresa. So Catherine, I saw you nodding there. Your thoughts on building trust in this issue?
Building trust also from experience, because I've actually been involved in a number of NFT auctions, some very successful for climate and conservation, which can be seen to the public as contradictory. And I think first and foremost, as policymakers and regulators, we have to understand better the evolution of technology and the platforms and the consensus mechanisms, and really understand that first and foremost, that it is a landscape, that not everything is built on proof of work, these energy intensive platforms, and that there is a transition in place, and that the actors in that space are also calling for that. And then in terms of building trust, it really is about being transparent about that. So for example, in our NFT auction, we made a statement with the artists, etc., about wanting this transition and actions that they can take. And then we're working, I'm working with a number of DAO and DeFi actors to actually help them make that transition as well to climate-friendly platforms and technology. So I think it's really understanding education of ourselves first, and then clear communications again to the public.
Thanks, Catherine. Christophe, you're mentioned in the question because I think you mentioned AI and machine learning in particular. So do you agree with what Teresa and Catherine have said there about how you raise awareness of these?
Yes, fully agree. I just want to add that maybe 1% or less, gut feeling, of green fintechs are using blockchain or newly NFTs or so. So it would be very unfair or gaslighting, or I don't know how you call that in English, to shape the entire green fintech discussion on the carbon use of carbon emission of blockchain-based thing. I think if we use the same standard with other technology or with real-world products, we wouldn't be in the situation we are currently in. So I think that's an important thing to mention as well.
Thanks, Christoph. Paola, did you want to add anything here on kind of how you help the public to kind of understand these new technologies?
Yes, I think that many things have been already recalled. I think definitely that I would say financial education also should cover also this area, which is a tech education, but also some challenges, and but also some how to use it in a safe way. I think that from that perspective, we can use technology as a really big driver in calling younger generation to have much more interested audience than before we had, from one side. From another side, we can use the same tools, or well, appropriately tailored toward also some for inclusive issues. So we know that technology has a very potential in trying to include people now excluded, especially from the financial sector. But the challenges on us, on government in general, are very big, although there is a very big drivers. From another perspective, I think that also for policymakers, sustainability in support will become the big challenging task for us, both in making regulations, but also in making policy decision.
Yeah.
Like this is it seems to be very natural and obvious issues, but believe me, it's very complex when you had to decline the sustainability aspects in a regulations or in a policy decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Paola. I want to move on to data in a moment, but there's a related question. Let's very quickly answer this one, because it came in actually from Mark Penrice in New Zealand. He sent this in advance of the webinar itself, and it's about blockchain, which we've just kind of touched on there. And Christoph, I want to come back to you in light of what you said about blockchain. So Mark has said, how much of the current financial system could be efficiently replaced by blockchain technology without the need for major financial institutions or the large amount of energy and resources they currently use? Do you want to answer that one very quickly?
I just want to add that I wouldn't want to live in a world like this. I mean, think about all these money laundering processes that we would lose on the way, and they all have a very distinct purpose that's currently lost with cryptocurrencies. So that's all I want to say on that topic. Okay.
Does anybody else want to answer this question about blockchain?
So I think that we should need some today's discussion on that, in the sense that we, as at least I speak from the central bank perspective, are very open, and we are entering in the market and with market operators in trying to understand how those technologies can be used in which areas, and to what perspective. Mm-hmm. There are many proof of concept, many projects around from financial markets activity. Europe is very active at Eurosystem level, but not only. Now we are facing some interesting talks, also what we call triggered solutions, in the sense of how our infrastructures can be coped with the new technology that could be used by our financial operators. So there are many ongoing activity on that, just to measure how to best accompany the markets toward the use of the best technology for the best reasons. I think that this will be the main challenges for the years ahead. Yes, for sure. I think there are also many potential benefits there, and especially in some specific area of the markets, of the financial markets. But we are to be confronted with and still continue to discuss.
Okay, thanks, Paola. Okay, I am going to move on to a question around data. Teresa, this actually came in directed at you, but I think it's relevant for all of our speakers. So it's from Brad Bass, and Brad asks, synthetic data has been used in climate change research since the 1980s. Hold on, my screen has just gone up.
I think someone just tried to answer it, which put it to answer.
Here we go. Synthetic data has been used in climate research since the 1980s. Is the fintech industry working with the climate community to take advantage of their experience and to build synergistic synthetic data sets combining climate and socioeconomic variables? I think this goes back to what Catherine was saying as well about maybe two communities not talking to each other. But your thoughts, Teresa, on the extent to which the use of synthetic data is happening here as it has in other previous kind of agenda?
Yeah, I think the collaboration is starting to happen. I think traditionally climate and finance haven't worked together, but we are definitely seeing them work together more now. I think especially around, for example, satellite imaging can provide really interesting data on climate data. But one of the things that we're seeing as an issue, and maybe it comes to how to use step around ratings, is that there's issues around how far some of this data can go right now. So satellite data can maybe measure some biodiversity. They'll be difficult to measure emissions as well in some contexts. And what we're seeing is that it's just not there yet around, for example, looking at data that might link green bonds. So we have a team that's looking at green bonds and how you might put that on blockchain and automate it. And that's something that's still going and being developed. So I think more of the traditional sense of climate is there, but these new emerging themes around measuring emissions, measuring social diversity, measuring governance, those still aren't at the stage of being ready to test yet. And so there's also a lot of quite expensive licensing fees in some of that. And so that's why synthetic data can become important. But I think there's still some way to go in making a set that works for all of these very niche problems that we're now seeing come about.
Thanks, Teresa. Catherine, I'm going to come to you on this issue of data because it was one thing that you highlighted, I think, in your presentation. Do you see this as kind of the big step change when actually data can be managed and used in a different way to how it's being used now? Is that kind of one of the kind of big potential areas left?
I think so. And again, I'm coming up from the climate area, and what I'm seeing happening in our ecosystem, which is now integrating more across sectors, is a climate action data group. It's an umbrella community that was established within the UNFCCC process on a portal for this global stocktake that's coming up with Paris, because we do need to have coherence, structure, alignment on standardization, data collection, etc. So this working group is actively collaborating, and it's open to other organizations. And I really highly recommend going in there, because there's also lessons learned as well as direct input.
Thanks, Catherine. Christoph, you mentioned in your presentation that there was still a lot more that could be done on data, in particular in terms of kind of measuring progress against targets and transition plans. So do you see this as a really big area where green fintechs can play a huge part?
Absolutely, and that one of the most successful green fintechs in Switzerland is Carbon Delta. It was founded in 2015, acquired by MSCI in 2019, and is now the basis for all portfolio alignment, transparency, implied temperature methods on global funds across all BlackRock funds and many others as well. So it's like they're providing a clear answer on is this fund aligned with the Paris Agreement or not? And it's highly complex, and you can now fight over the individual assumptions and say that some of them might not yet be robust compared to other methodologies, but it's a field. Green fintechs are very, very active and are really at cutting edge in providing this transparency for asset managers to have a decision basis.
Yeah, thanks, Christoph. And Paula, two of the problem statements that you had on the tech sprint were data related, I think. And was that the result of kind of an international debate and conversation?
Yes, sure. And we found a very good ideas, and when at least I'm be told, because as I said, the jury was all outside our institutions, but the project that was presented allows to a better understanding also from our side how data are important, how the gaps are there. But there is also really a big opportunity from digitalization in trying to, I would say, trying to put together the available data and trying to find out some standardization there in order to improve the quality of data. This is an important task that is there in the international field. The UN is very active on that field, but not only. Each I would say, public parties, both central banks, but also government ones, could help us in help us as a society to have better access to better data.
Thanks, Paula. We had a couple of questions in from Ian Horn. I think they were answered, but not everybody in the audience might have seen the answers. So I just want to combine two of Ian's questions, which is, who's driving green fintech in the private sector? So who are the kind of leading players of this in the private sector? And then he's also put, which international orgs in the public sector do you see as leading on green finance? So maybe which governments, which public organizations are leading in this area? Teresa, your thoughts on this? And you're quite welcome to say yourselves if you think you are a leading player in this area, because that's why you've been picked for the panel.
I think in the UK, at least, there's the Green Finance Institute, which is doing a lot of work around this. And that's something that the City Corporation has supported as well. They, together, we just hosted the Green Horizon Summit earlier in November last year, which was all around how can we support sustainable finance and finance for green growth. So that's a really active field in the UK from a financial perspective. And I think there's also Innovate Finance as well from a tech perspective, and there's a number of different accelerators. So I think from the private sector, there's quite a lot of tech development that's happening, whether that is tech first or whether it's almost industry groups that are supporting tech through acceleration. I think probably between the two. But at the same time, trying to align that with, like, there is challenges that they need to solve. And so there needs to be better collaboration in that way, I think, for it to be really successful.
Thanks, Teresa. Christoph, I'm going to ask you this because I've heard you in the past refer to a kind of healthy race to the top because people are kind of competing to be the best. So who do you see as the leading players in this field at the moment? You mean as leading jurisdictions or? I think both. So we've been asked the question both in the private sector and kind of public sector organizations. So who do you see in both sectors?
without making a judgment, I think it's like there's various financial centers that really want to drive and want to be leading in this. Some of their specializations, like Stockholm with a green bond platform, Switzerland with the green Fintech network, Singapore obviously with the Fintech festival that more and more is in focus on green Fintech. That's obviously a very powerful platform, and I think that's you see many financial centers, and they all want to position themselves on this. And this, as I mentioned, is a race to the top, and that's exactly what we need in all the fields of sustainable finance. So we need all financial institutions to race to the top when it comes to their pledges. We need them to race to the top when it comes to their credibility of the pledges and the implementation of the pledges. We need it when it comes to jurisdictions, when it comes to transparency, and we need it on the technology side as well.
Thanks, Christoph. Paolo, I mean, Christoph mentioned there the Singapore, the Finance Festival, and you mentioned that in your presentation, and you also said the importance of kind of the global community working on this. Did any players stick out for you in particular during that work on that initiative?
Well, I think that the huge impact that the Singapore Festival has is just on their ability to take on board all the different important players around the world, both from the private small entities, as you also our e-books showed, but also from other big players around. So exactly they really improve the international connections around and the interaction between the different players. I'm also convinced that under the BIS umbrella and also the hubs that have been built around the world, there could be really an international cooperation in developing different projects, both from the institutional perspective, but also vis-a-vis the most relevant experience around the world. I think that there could be some really good governance, I would say, at the global level.
Thanks,
at least from financial aspects. Thank you.
Catherine, very quickly on this one as well. I've just looked at the time, so after this we've only got time for one more round of questions, but your thoughts on who the best players are from your experience of working with different organizations, I think, around the globe.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were going to the risk question. I just accidentally deleted.
I'll come to that one in our final question.
Yes, the best actors, I think, again, I always look to the different sectors. So I think if the fintech sectors are largely coming to the financial sector. So I think the fintech startups and innovation and policy is operating in one lane, and the climate and SDG are operating across many. So I think stakeholders across specific value chains are really essential in the innovations as well as in the policy. So we're seeing collaborative governance, we're seeing collaborative consortia builds in the fintech sphere and in the climate sphere. And this means that actors from the Bank of International Settlement to startups to local governments, in every situation and every build I'm in right now, it is an incredible merging of different stakeholders and actors that are identified by the problems we're trying to address.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so we're going to come to our final round of questions in a moment. Just to say to the audience, thank you so much for being such a great audience. We can't get through all the questions because you've been in so many during the webinar, but we'll make sure that any that we didn't manage to get to today get answered behind the scenes, so you will all get an answer. And also just to say, in your inboxes you will find there's a survey that has been sent around. I'd be hugely grateful if you could take a couple of minutes just to complete that questionnaire. It just means that we can make sure we give you the webinars that are best suited to the things that you want to discuss. So thank you so much if you could do that for us after this webinar. So in terms of the final question, there's one that's come in. It was directed at you, Catherine, and it says, you mentioned policymakers need to accept newer risks, and financial regulators are very focused on risk management. Can you elaborate on these newer risks that you see? Transition risk seems to raise a lot of the usual suspects, e.g. credit market operational risks. So I think an issue around risks, and I'd like to ask the other three panel members who all sit kind of close to kind of governments or working with government organizations, do you think policymakers maybe are still a bit too risk averse when it comes to some of these issues? So Catherine, for you first.
Yes, and again, I'm not coming from within the sector. So what I see are two levels of risk. We have the risks within this current lane and within these current lenses, but then we also have the risk of missing out and not adapting and becoming less innovative and having the policy frameworks and risk assessments that are almost obsolete, because this is already happening beyond this sector. We have new funding models, new integration, cross-sectoral or cross-stakeholder co-creation, including with the big tech framework that we've just released with the UNDP. This extended dialogue focuses on invisible risks and measures that we cannot address right now, but we need to build out in collaboration with them, because we cannot keep up with our frameworks and risks. So I would say, yeah, the fear of missing out is really important here. And the fact that it is actually strategic and collaborative adaptation is already in development.
Thanks, Catherine. Christoph, I'm going to come to you. Do you think public servants, civil servants are still a bit too risk averse, but also can some of these new technologies help them to understand some of those new risks better?
Yes. I would say, as an economist, what you hear frequently from policymakers is, well, climate risk translates into the normal risk categories of market risk, liquidity risk, credit risk, and operation risk. Therefore, it's already covered by current capital requirements, and which is absolutely true. I think the thought process just can't stop there, but you have to realize that whilst the risk channels is these are the traditional ones, it still needs a lot of methodological advancements on the side of the financial institutions to correctly assess the risks in their books. And it's also very difficult because the horizon is very long. So it might not be relevant for all that, and not as relevant for the trade book as for the banking book. So there's a lot of competence needed on that side. It then just translates into the normal risk.
Thanks, Christoph. Paola, the same question to you. So your thoughts for the audience on kind of this issue of new risks and technology and new risks.
Yes, well, as a central bank, we usually tackle risks on the balancing our policies in terms of benefit and risks. So we try always to keep the risk side of the coin under control, and we develop many policies and the requirements on that issues because mainly for two main reasons. One is trust. This is how to ensure trust in innovation without to take under control risks, that it's the major challenges we have to face with. So this is also a response to other questions we had at the beginning. So how to be confronted with the public, with the users of technology without taking part of these issues. There are some areas in which risks are, well, somehow sometimes overwhelmed because there are some new areas in which that we do not still know so much. So that in that case, we were to try to better understand risks and then try to cope with them, but without kill innovation. That's our challenges. But for us, risks always is linked to the trust in the financial system. So this is why it's so relevant. And then because it's a social cost for the society to be controlled. Thank you.
Thanks, Paola. Teresa, we started with you. I'm going to give you the final say on Megumi's question on risk.
Perfect, thank you. I think I agree with what everyone has said so far in terms of we're sort of still stuck in the old ways of evaluating and stuck in the old ways of how to assess risk. And generally, public policy still tends to be reactive compared to proactive, versus this is a situation where, depending on the sector, you really need to look at it innovatively and think about how can you try new things, how can you fail faster, how can you accept more risk, because you may need a greater outcome. And I think one of the issues, or a couple issues here, is having new skills, new digital skills, for example, to feel comfortable with these types of tools, thinking about, for example, use of cloud, but also thinking about how do we get away from policy being tied to politics. And so much of policy is aimed at short wins. How can we give short goals to the electorate, for example, instead of thinking about the long-term impact? And we just haven't figured out a way to align that with the public, and that has made it easy to fall back on risk instead of doing something that might be more long-term in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Teresa. I can't believe how quickly our time has gone, and sadly we are out of time. I would like to say a big thank you again to the audience for all their wonderful questions. I think the discussion was absolutely fascinating in terms of showing just how important some of these new kind of green fintechs can be in helping the public sector and the private sector to meet those urgent targets and to kind of speed up innovation. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Christoph, to Paola, to Teresa and to Catherine for lending us their expertise and giving up so much of their time. It was a great conversation. And wherever you are today, I hope you have a really good rest of the day, and I hope that we see you on another one of our webinars very soon. There will be a link to this video sent to everybody who registered, so if you weren't able to watch it all, you'll be able to do that, and you can share it with all of your colleagues. And we will be sending you a link to an article with the key issues that were raised in today's conversation as well, so you can share that with your networks as well. So it just leaves me to say thank you to everybody, thank you to our panel members, and hope to see you all again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.